I would like to call Dr. Ankita Gupta. Regarding Ankita Gupta, she is working as head of the Department of English at GGDST College, Chandigarh. She has 6 years of teaching experience. She is a gold medalist from University of Jammu. Her area of specialization is in the field of Fourth World literature, Australian Aboriginal literature, Dalit literature. She has published many research papers in peer-reviewed international and national journals and contributed chapters in various books. She has a special love for poetry and has 5 poems published in international anthologies to her credit. She has also authored one book on William Shakespeare, the literary bard. She has also facilitated and coordinated more than 10 e-conferences during the pandemic and acted as chairperson in various national and international seminars and webinars. She has a platinum membership in Cape Comorin Literary Club, Tamil Nadu. Besides this, she is actively engaged in preparing students for training and placements and mentoring NPTEL courses organized by IITs in the field of soft skills and personality development. Post-COVID, she has worked on developing and designing MOOC courses and is working on research projects related to technological assistance in teaching, learning, pedagogy. Dr. Gupta, mic is yours now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the generous introduction. A very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend my warmest and sincerest greetings to NMCC College, the Department of English and Research Center, Kanyakumari, Tamil Nadu. I'm highly grateful to you as well as the organizers, Cape Comorin Trust, for giving me this opportunity to be the resource person for the plenary session 2. The topic for today's session, that is on Fourth World literature. This is very close to my heart because I am a scholar of Fourth World literature. I have done my PhD on the Australian Aboriginal literature, which is a part of the Fourth World literature. And as we understand this term Fourth World literature, it is a huge umbrella term, and I would really try to be of value to you guys during the session, and maybe extend my guidance or expertise, whatever I have learned during my PhD and after completing my PhD in the teaching so far. So my session would primarily concern about understanding this umbrella term Fourth World, and then deciphering the meaning of Fourth World literature in context, in a global context, because Fourth World literature is not just restricted to one continent or one group of people, and how in the Indian context we can apply this term Fourth World literature. So that is what I have tried to do in my presentation. Just give me a quick check if my presentation is visible to all of you. I'll just share it with you. Yeah, is my presentation visible?
Yes, it is.
Thank you so much. Yeah. When we talk about Fourth World literature, and there are few terms which are paramount in the understanding of this term Fourth World literature. The first term that we need to understand is what is Fourth World, because before understanding the context, because as students of literature, as scholars and as teachers of literature, we do understand that no literature is written in vacuum. Literature is the face of the society. So we really need to understand the term Fourth World before we begin to decipher the meaning of the term Fourth World literature. And there are certain terms like marginalized. There are certain terms like, the peripheral race. There are certain terms like dispossessed. So all these terms need to be we need to understand these terms before, for analyzing a text which belongs to this gamut of term, which is Fourth World literature. So, if we try to understand that what is Fourth World, So we know that there before that era of Cold War, there was a political constellation of countries, and the globe was divided primarily into two sections. On one side, we had the democratized and the industrialized capitalistic nations, which were aligned with the US. And this particular group constituted what we understand as the Western world or the free world. And on the other hand, there was this bloc, the Eastern bloc, the communist bloc, or the socialist countries within the power fabric of the Soviet Union and Mao's China. And Europe somewhere was, there were neutral countries in Europe. And then there was the third world countries, which were like India, which were colonized by the Europeans. So there was, on the one hand, there was the first world, the bloc of democratized, industrialized countries, which were allies of America. On the other hand, there was second world. Second world was, people with communist and socialist ideologies. And the third world, which is the remaining 3/4 of the world population countries, which were colonized primarily by the Europeans. And then there is another world, which is termed as the fourth world. So what is this fourth world? What do we mean by this fourth world? These are those particular unknown nations or the cultural entities of indigenous people. So very important term is indigenous people, indigenous and native people. Indigenous people means people who belong rightfully to a particular land. Like when I started doing my PhD on Australian Aboriginal literature, I was unaware of the fact that Australia has a black history. I was always, of the opinion that Australia is a continent of white people. It's only after I started reading about them that is the time when I got to know about it, that Australia has black people who are native or the indigenous people of that particular continent. So indigenous native people are the first nation people who are the rightful heirs of that particular geographical land. So they are the people who are who belong to that land, but the land has been usurped by them, from them by the colonizers. So this is the geographical map, the world map. So all the areas which are tinted green are the first world countries. Then the red ones are the third world countries, and the ones with a creamish yellow tint are the third world countries. Now, what is fourth world? So as I have been telling you, that fourth world people are the native indigenous people, and they are surprisingly the most underdeveloped. They are poverty stricken, and they are the oppressed people living in their own continents. So this is a very ironical situation for them, because they are the rightful heirs of that particular land, but in their own country, they are being drifted to the peripheries. They are living the life of marginalized, oppressed, poverty-stricken, underdeveloped race and people in their own land. So this is the entire irony of the colonizing process, which was started by the Europeans or by the white man under the garb of white man's burden. And what do we understand by the term white man's burden? White man's burden was that these as Edward Said said, that these Europeans or colonizers, they divided the world into two blocks, the Orients and the Occidents, the Westerners or the Easterners, the civilized and the uncivilized. So there was this garb of white man's burden to make these supposedly or discoursed, I would say the term discoursed group of savage people. They wanted to bring literacy to them, or they wanted to make them a refined race in their terms. And now we understand that this was a total garb, this was a total sham, because their ulterior motives were totally different. The ulterior motive was to use their land resources. They usurped their lands, and they brutally, there was a total deracination, and there was a total try of genocide to take away all the rights from these people and drift them to the peripheries and the margins in their own particular land. So many of these nation inhabitants have no political connections who are often hunter-gatherers, the nomadic tribal people, living in the nomadic societies or are part of some tribe. They may be completely functional and self-sustaining, but fourth world status is granted based on their economic growth. And this term fourth world was born as an extension of the developing third world to portray places and populations with extremely low per capita incomes and limited land resources or natural resources. Now, this term fourth world basically came up to the literary front, the literary arena in 1974 with the publication of George Manuel's book, A Path Breaking, a very paramount text if you are a scholar of fourth world and if you want to do some kind of contribution in this field. This is a paramount book which is written by George Manuel, and it came out in the year 1974, and the title is The Fourth World and Indian Reality. Now, Manuel thought of the fourth world as the indigenous people descended from a country's aboriginal population. See, I'm using these terms aboriginal, indigenous, and native interchangeably for the session because of the paucity of time. But, if you really want to go deep into the understanding or the definition of these terms, then of course there are thin line of, some difference between these three terms, but more or less they can be used interchangeably. So these aboriginal population, and they today are completely or partly deprived of the right to their own territories and its riches. So, it's a very ironical and a shameful thing for us as humanity to witness such things, that, these are the people who are the rightful, they belong to that particular territory. They are the people who belong to that land and all the natural resources and everything. And, surprisingly, they are the people who are deprived of everything. They are the people who are living on the margins because of man's selfish greed. Once they were the majority population, and today they have been reduced to the minority living on the fringes of society. So it's a kind of a reverse pyramid, that if we start going back to the history, we will see that they were the majority population, but because of certain policies of the colonizers, they are now living. So it's a kind of a pyramid. So they have now become they occupy a very narrow position, and they are the minority people who are living on the fringes of the society. Now, George Manuel, he was a revered indigenous leader of Canada. He advocated the political unification of indigenous people across the globe. So he did not limit the term fourth world to just the indigenous people of Canada to a country he belonged to, but he said that we need to politically unify. There has to be a unification of indigenous people all across the globe for the formation of this movement, because we understand that any movement gains strength in unity, and it gains significance only when voices are coming from each and every corner of the globe. So he did not limit the use of this term, per se to Canada only, but he extended, and he said that we need to give prominence to this concept of fourth world, and we have to, accept literature from all the indigenous people all across the globe. So he was the president of the World Council of Indigenous People during 1975 and 81, and he traveled extensively and realized that the indigenous people, wherever they are, maybe in Sweden, Nicaragua, Chile, Guatemala, or wherever they are, they have, there is a common thread of unity in the face of adversity. So this unity is a binding factor. This unity is a binding factor for all the indigenous people, the native people or the aboriginal people, be they from Canada or the aboriginals of Australia, or the Aztecs or the Maoris, or for that matter, the tribals of India. So there is certain thread of unity. And if you are studying fourth world literature, you will find that literature coming from any particular continent, but there will be certain factors which are similar in the literature written by fourth world people. Now, to promote this perspective, In assistance with Michael Postlins, he published the book The Fourth World and Indian Reality in the year 1974. And this is a path-breaking work. And this is how the term Fourth World came into the forefront of the literary arena. Now, Fourth World, what does it embrace? It embraces small nations of under 12 million inhabitants. It also embraces groups working for their autonomy and independence at all levels, from the neighborhood to the nation, the minority groups, whether they are ethnic or linguistic, cultural, religious, and those in the field of peace, action, ecology, economics, energy resources, women's liberation, and the whole spectrum of the alternative movement, who are struggling against the gigantism of the institution of today's mass societies and for a human scale and a non-centralized, multicellular, power-dispersed world order. So this is a quote from another book, that is How to Save the World, A Fourth World Guide to the Politics of Scale by Albury. And this came up in the year 1984. I'm giving you a reference of these books because, after the session also maybe some, if it is of some value to you, so you can refer to these books for a better understanding of the term fourth world. Now, there's another book which is very significant when we are understanding or when we are looking into the term fourth world and we are understanding what fourth world encompasses. And that book is written by Noel Dick, and the title is Indigenous People and the Nation State. And what does it state about the Aboriginal population? It's in the book, Noel Dick says that Aboriginal population in different parts of the world is struggling variously to retain traditional land, to cope with government administration of their affairs, and to survive as culturally distinct people within nation states. So, Aboriginal population and their work, we will see it, after a few slides when I'm talking about the various features of the fourth world literature, that land is very, very significant. Land is not just a natural resource to them, but land has a deeper just a second. Just a second. Yeah, so this land has a significant meaning to these people, and land to them is like mother. It's not just a means of survival, or it's just not a natural resource, because the Western understanding of the term land is from a capitalistic viewpoint. But for them, land has a symbolic meaning. So retaining their land rights back is one of the significant features of fourth world literature. Again, the government, all the policies which were adopted by the government, if I'm talking about the policies which Australian government adopted for the Aboriginal people of Australia, like the policies where they were taken away from their mother, the policies like which created a group of people which are known as the stolen generation, or there were so many policies where the children were taken away from their parents under the garb of civilizing them or making them more learned and literate. So all these policies were just a sham to basically take them away and deracinate them from their culture and weaken them in their understanding of their roots. So these people are speaking about against, or through their writing, it's a kind of a reverse discourse where they are protesting against these policies of the government, and they are talking about survival. That how we can survive as a culturally distinct people, that we are not, we don't want to be akin to the Western world. We don't want to be same like the white people. We are culturally distinct people, and we want to retain our identity back. So all these, terms with the prefixes, with prefix re, like regain, retain, and relocate, all these terms are significant. Rewrite their history, because the history which is written about fourth world people is all written from a white perspective. So they say that history is distorted. and we are just shown as a melancholic footnote by white people in their historical narratives. So we, through our writings, we are rewriting our history. We are representing ourselves. We are regaining our identity. So all these terms are extremely significant in terms of fourth world literature. Now, what is the distinction between the ethnic minorities and the fourth world people? I have made it clear in the presentation, because, when I'm making sessions, there is a very common question which comes up almost everywhere, that what is the difference between fourth world people and the ethnic minorities? See, the difference is that ethnic minorities, they are the immigrants. They are not the original inhabitants. But fourth world people are the original inhabitants, the native people, the first world people which belong to that particular territory. So they have not immigrated from the. So, all these slides boil down to one particular aspect, and where we can define fourth world people as either the purple arrow or the orange one. Either we can say that they are the poorest, if we go by the economic definition. So they are, this I am giving in a very layman language to make you understand, so that it becomes very, very crystal clear. It is like crystal clear, like who are fourth world people. So fourth world people economically are the poorest and the most underdeveloped state of the world. And if we talk about the socio-political scenario, they are the underprivileged and the oppressed victims of the state. So they are marginalized economically, socially, politically. So from all the aspects, they are the marginalized, dispossessed people who are writing, or their literature is a kind of a reverse discourse against a very hegemonic and a very colonized representation, or I would say a misrepresentation of the fourth world people. So if they are the people who are marginalized and oppressed and disadvantaged, then the literature would also be the literature of the marginalized, the literature of the oppressed, or the literature of the disadvantaged. So whether coming from Canada or Australia or Mexico or New Zealand or India, it will all fall into the category of fourth world literature if it is the literature of the marginalized, if it is the literature of oppressed, and if it is the literature of the disadvantaged. So there is a global unification of their concerns. So this fourth world literature is a space for understanding the shared cultural experiences of the people who were once the majority of the population and who have, through colonial occupation, been the victims of genocide, both cultural and physical, that reduced their numbers so that they are now in the minority in colonially occupied land. It is the expression of man's ruthless materialism and imperialistic will, because this was the ulterior motive of the colonizers. They really didn't want to, there was nothing, this whole mission of civilizing the Eastern people or the mystics or the savages. This was all a sham. This was just a complete, a misrepresentation of their ulterior or their basic motive, which was materialism, of course, and imperialistic will. So owing to this dialectic variation and terminological variances, fourth world literature can be best understood when considered through a socio-linguistic lens. So their literature is not a art for art's sake, as Walter Pater puts it. No. So they are writing from a very socio-political aim, because they are trying to come to the forefront of the political scenario, political socio arena. So their literature has a socio-political aim, because such lens connects indigenous cultures to their language and oral traditions. So all the linguistic features or the cultural features or the significance of land and past and dreamtime stories, all these are integral part of their literature. Now, these are few examples of fourth world people: the Native Americans in North America, the Maoris in New Zealand, the Aboriginals in Australia, the Aztecs in Mexico, the Inuits in Canada, or the tribal groups anywhere in the world, they all fall into the gamut of fourth world people. Now, what are the various features? Because we have understood that there is a unification, there is a unifying thread of similarity in the literature coming from the fourth world people. So what are the significant? I mean, there are certain nuances which are there in every writer. There you will find certain features which are, exclusive to a particular writer, but majorly or in a generic way, we can say that there are certain features which are apparently present in writers of fourth world literature, which are, a few of them are like native consciousness, because they are talking about their indigenous roots. They are talking about their cultural distinctiveness. So native consciousness is one significant feature. Through their writings, they are rewriting the history, because as I have already told you, they discard the historical narrative, the discoursed history, which is, according to them, a very Western representation of their cultural identity. So they are, through their texts, they are writing or rewriting their histories. And what is the aim of doing that? The aim is to regain their identity, to reclaim their land rights, and to reinforce value of lost culture. Basically, they are doing all these things to gain their identity back, to claim their land rights, and to reinforce value in the lost culture for their younger generation, as well as for a wider audience who are reading it, that our culture, or the representation that has been imposed on us, that we are the savage people, or we are the nomadic race, and whatever cults we follow, or whatever culture we have, is all savage and it makes no sense. So they are trying to reinforce value in that our culture has a deeper symbolic significance, maybe, which the Western people couldn't decipher. I hope it's clear as to this point, so that we can move further. And if anybody has a doubt, we can take it during the session or after the session, because I don't want the audience to lose interest, and it to be just a one-sided discourse. Any one of you, if you can just give me a quick check. Shall we move ahead?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah. So when we talk about the aim of fourth world literature writers, the first thing that we have to understand is that they write from a socio-political aim, and they do not write only for the aesthetics of it, only for the enjoyment of it. They write, their literature has a social value, because their voice is like, the indigenous writer for them is like a voice, an upholder of that indigenous voice, which is, a representation of their true cultural and individual identity. So they really criticize, and they really put down the Western representations, and they term them as false and distorted. And hence, the literature becomes a kind of a variant discourse or a counter discourse. And they are writing in order to represent themselves and their culture in full bloom of richness. And they are instilling a sense of pride. They have a sense of pride about their culture. They have a sense of pride about their roots. They are not running away from their roots or their culture, and they are not ready to accept whatever representation has been put to, whatever representation has been done on behalf of them, and they claim it to be absolutely false, and their literature therefore can be termed as a counter discourse. I hope that everybody understands what is discourse, a stream of thought. So it's a kind of a counter discourse, that we are not going to accept the representation that has been mulled on us. Then since their literature, or since their culture is primarily oral, there was no written account of their culture, So they have a lot of insistence on this orality, and they do not they deviate from the concept of unity of time, action, and place, because they do not understand time as a linear thing. For them, time has a circular context. There is life after death. So whenever a person dies, it's not like the death as we understand in terms of a Western viewpoint. It's like going back and merging with the ancestors, which is actually what is dream time. So particularly in the Australian context, this dream time is in their language, or the language that they use is Alihirinja or Altirinja. And this is a term which is used by Aboriginals denoting a mythological past. And see, the beautiful understanding, if we really go to the literature, it has, and you will be able to connect it in some way to the Indian context also, where we revere the natural environment as well. And whenever somebody dies in India also, we have this concept of going back to the ancestors, and we have this reverence in the memory of that person who has departed from the world. And we kind of do all kind of a puja or some kind of a ceremony we submerge the ashes in the river. So that kind of a significance, because they believe that it is not just the death of a person, it's going back to the ancestors. It's merging with the natural environment. So their concept of time is entirely different from a linear directional time, which we understand from a Western viewpoint. Now, most indigenous people believe that all life, as we know today, human, animal, plant, it's a unification. It's a vast, complex, single network of relationships. That natural environment, flora, fauna is not distinct from us. We all belong together to the greater planet, to the greater spirit. And this is what is dream time. So, when they are constructing non-linear time in their texts, again, this is a textual resistance to the colonized or the hegemonic representation of them. So this is again a resistance through their text when they are creating or insisting orality or dreamtime stories in their text. And a critic, Helen Gilbert, says that constructions of non-linear time take different forms like juxtaposition, elision, overlaying of different time frames, repetition of visual oral images, representation of dreamtime stories, incorporation of historical documents. So all these textual features, all these metaphors you will find in their writing, and these are strong resistive features in the writings of Fourth World writers, which are countering the discourse. Significance of land, another very significant feature of Fourth World literature, because displacement is a central issue for them. Displacement from their land in the garb of development and progress. Because since they are nomadic people, they are dependent on land, not just for resources, but land is not just a means of resource or livelihood, but they look at land as an ancestor, which is respected, which is pious, sacred, and land to them, again, is a living thing. Because they believe that, we are going to go back to our ancestors through this land. So land for them is very, very important. So when they were displaced from their land, it was, very disheartening for these people, because land was just not a means of livelihood or survival, but it was like their ancestors. It was like their elderly people, a living thing. So when they were removed, it had a debilitating impact on their cultural and social structure. And you can just very well imagine the kind of trauma they would have faced, the mental, physical illness due to this dispossession of the land. So when we are studying Fourth World literature, be it any writer, we will see that there will be a significance of land. The characters will feel a sense of vacuum when they are displaced by the government from their original land. So land for them was a fountain spring. Mudruru Naruking is a very famous critic from Australia talking about Aboriginal rights. He says that the core of our tribal culture is music, dance, ceremonies, and storytelling. All these are closely bound up with the land and nature is in sacred ceremonies and rituals. So, by forcefully dislocating the natives from their land, the colonial powers robbed them of their history, culture, tradition, and values. Because land is just not a means of livelihood. I have been repeating it ever since. It is their history, it is their culture, it is their ancestors, the traditions, the roots, the values. So it's like cutting the plant off the root. So they were, the colonial powers, when they took away the land rights, they were the original inhabitants, but of course there was no paperwork done by them. So they were now termed as terra nullius. Terra nullius is a term which means that they do not belong to the land since they do not have a written documentation of their belonging to the land. So just imagine the kind of trauma that they underwent. Now, Amy Segier's description of the native people under the colonial rule is highly suggestive and worth quoting here. Amy Segier says that society is drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religion smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, and the extraordinary possibilities wiped out. So their societies, they were drained of everything. They were drained of their identity, their essence, their culture, their institutions. So everything about them was termed as barbaric. Everything about them was termed as uncivilized. So there was a complete erasure of these people from, it was all negative. It was all evil. Whatever representation was given about them, it was completely negative. Another significant feature of fourth world literature is the incorporation of dance, mythical characters, songs, and body art. If you have also seen or read books about them, you will see that there are characters or mythical characters in the plays or in the novels, and they are performing some ancestral dance or some ritual, and they have a tendency of painting themselves. There is, if you've seen a cover of some book, a book from written by some fourth world writer, you will see that on the cover you will have these characters who are painted. That paint is known as vilgi. So all these little things, they become significant metaphors in their writings, and these metaphors are metaphors of emancipation, of freedom from the colonial burden. So when these writers are incorporating the songs and and these songs are played to the native instruments like clapsticks and didgeridoo. So these are very little bit small features, but they become resistive voices against the colonial discourse. So indigenous dancers, they are exotically painted, there are naked bodies, and all these are exemplifying their unique identity, that we are culturally distinct, but we are proud about our distinctiveness. It is not a strange distinctiveness, but it is a rich distinctiveness. So these all these features are metaphors of emancipation, and they are a strong mode of resistance against the dominant ideologies and epistemologies. There is a strong sense of community in their cultures. Their culture is not it doesn't hinge on the concept of individualism. They hinge on the concept of community, communal ties. So when they were taken away, or when they were, I have highlighted the term stolen generation here. Stolen generation has a past of that brutal policy adopted by the white Australian government, where the small children were taken away from their mothers, the Aboriginal native mothers, under the pretext that Aboriginal mothers are incapable of giving their child a healthy upbringing. So just imagine, can a mother ever not be able to give a good cultural upbringing to a child? It is not possible. But They were taken away because they showed that it was the most inhuman act ever in the history of Australia, the colonial rule in Australia, where children were taken away forcefully from their mothers. And when a child is taken away, the mother is going to be all out of her wits, and then they would show that, see, the mother, she is not even capable of she is not mentally fit, she is not mentally physically fit to take care of the child. So these children, they were taken away from the mothers and they were put into reserves, and in the government reserve they had to undergo all kind of atrocities. They had to undergo all kind of mental, physical traumas, be it a girl child or a male child. There was no there was no importance given to their education. Basically, what they were doing was that they were deracinating them. They did not want them to be raised in the cultural sense, and they did not want the indigenous values to be incorporated into their children. So the strong community sense and the communal ties, which were very, very important for these societies, these were enmeshed. These were brutally smashed. Now, Kath Walker is a very prominent voice from Australia, and I really wanted to share this poem by her, Assimilation No. She writes, see, the title is very simple, but it is very strong. She says, no, we are not going to assimilate. We are not going to assimilate with the Western people. And why should we? We are distinct. We have our own culture. We have our own past. She says that we are different hearts and minds in a different body. Do not ask of us to be deserters, to disown our mother, to change the unchangeable. The gum cannot be trained into an oak. That no amount of training, no amount of colonial upbringing can take away that essence from us. Because the gum, it cannot be trained. Everybody has a different, distinct characteristic. Our race is different from your race. Do not try to train us. Let us just be ourselves. We have our own past. Let us thrive and survive in our own culture, and do not try to assimilate us into yours. Accept us instead of segmentation, which Edward Said says that there was a segmentation. So we do not want to be segmented. We want to be accepted as we are. So when we understand this concept of fourth world in the Indian context, in the Indian context, we can say that the Dravidians were the original inhabitants. It was once thought about like that Dravidians were the original inhabitants. But this view has considerably been modified, and now it has been extended that the original inhabitants of India are the pre-Dravidian Aborigines, that is the ancestors of the present tribals or the Adivasis. The Adivasis in the tribals of India and their ancestors. It goes back to that time. So Supreme Court in its judgment on 5th January 2011 unequivocally asserted that scheduled tribes are indigenous people of India who are probably the descendants of the original inhabitants of India, but now constitute only 8% of our total population, and as a group are one of the most marginalized and vulnerable communities in India, characterized by high level of poverty, illiteracy, unemployment, disease, and landlessness. So again, there is a unification of the concerns of the fourth world people throughout the globe, be it poverty or illiteracy or the issues of unemployment, and we witness it in 2021 as well. So, however, there are platforms where we come and where we talk about the Dalits, and when we talk about the tribal people and their rights and everything, but somehow it just there are changes, but in the mammoth of the civilization, the changes, it takes time and for the changes to be realized in the real world. Of course, there are changes which are coming up, but more or less we see this discrimination even today in various aspects of life. So therefore, we can boil down, or we can come to a gist that the original inhabitants of India are the pre-Dravidians Munda Aborigines, whose descendants presently live in parts of Chota Nagpur, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, West Bengal, Todas of the Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, the tribals in the Andaman Islands, the Adivasis, in various hills and forests of India, like Gond, Santals, Bills, and in to the state which I belong to, Jammu and Kashmir, the Gujjars. So all these people can be categorized as the fourth world people in India. This is just a list of few writers all across the globe. So I've not constrained my session to just one particular, I didn't want to do it deliberately, because I wanted to show you how this unification is there all across the globe. So Joy Harjo, she is named as the Poet Laureate of US now. So their voices are not insignificant. Their voices are very much there in the literary arena, and they are very strong, resistive voices now. So she is a Poet Laureate, and she belongs to the Muskogee Creek Nation. Harjo became the first indigenous poet to hold that honor. She has written 14 books of poetry like Super Soul Conversation, Conflict Resolutions for Holy Beings. Louise Erdrich, she is an acclaimed, and if you will minutely look into the presentation, you will find that there is not just one particular genre also to which they are restricting. They are writing they're covering almost all the genres, be it poetry or novel or playwriting or short stories. So the voices are coming from all parts of the globe and in all the forms of literary text. So she is an acclaimed and well-known American novelist. And if we will just have a gist of the two novels, The Night Watchman, see, the concerns in this this is based on the 1950s to protect the Native Americans from losing the benefits guaranteed to them in the treaties with the federal government. In another novel, Love Medicine, this was the first novel by her. It also follows the intertwined families of the Chippewa Reservation in North Dakota, the Roundhouse National Book Award winning novel. So they are not just writing, they are also winning awards for their resistive voices. Thomas King, another very significant voice, a very significant indigenous voice, The Inconvenient Indians. It offers opinions like the issue has always been land. So these are certain quotations I've taken up to show you that these are the basic features which are paramount for fourth world people. Greengrass Running Water, a darkly entertaining tale that fuses myth and contemporary life. Again, that theatrical syncretism, which Helen Gilbert says that they infuse the mythical features. They are delineating from that very concept of unity of time, action, and place, and they are infusing their own mythical features into their writings. So he has a unique writing style, which is informed by the oral storytelling tradition and humor. Humor, again, I missed this point in my presentation. Humor is a very significant, potent weapon in the hand of indigenous writers. Because see, their writing is protest writing, but you will have a humorous tone to it. They are resisting in a very humorous manner. There is a tongue-in-cheek style of saying the things and resisting the colonial rule. So humor is, again, a very significant, potent metaphor in their writings. And humor is a means of survival, because they say that we are here to survive. We are not going to, become really depressed and dejected and not resist against the colonial misrepresentation. And we will do it in a very tongue-in-cheek style, in a very latent way, through our Black humor, which is different from the humor we understand, again, from the Western viewpoint. N. Scott Momaday, he won the Pulitzer Prize also for the novel Housemaid of Dawn, an accomplishment set to mark the start of the Native American Renaissance, in which a slate of Native American writers rose to prominence in the 60s. Momaday, who is a member of the Kiowa Nation, was encouraged by the new generation of indigenous writers. Jack Davis, he is an Australian. Earlier, we were talking about indigenous writers from America, and he is a significant voice from Australia, and he is a poet as well as a playwright, and some significant works are like No Sugar, The Dreamers, Kulak, and The Newborn, and all these place, they are kind of rewriting of the history, because he believed that history was distorted when it was written by the white man. So our first job is to first bring forth our history. So his plays are based in different eras of different historical eras, to bring forth the history also to the forefront, apart from the other features. So, the list is too long. We have indigenous voices from all across the globe: Eva Johnson, Richard Walley, Lee Maracle, Bob Mazza, Billy Belkow, Natalie Diaz, Janet Armstrong, Rita Jo, and it continues. It's a continuing process, and this is not going to stop now, because they have become very significant, and all kind of marginalization and dispossession and the poverty and all the other issues are very much there in the forefront of literary world. From a very Indian viewpoint, important significant writers and their books are Painted Words, an anthology of tribal literature. This is edited by G.N. Davy. G.N. Davy, again, a very important writer in understanding the fourth world literature. And this book is about a rich collection of writing in a variety of genres by the large population of indigenous people from India known as Adivasis. This anthology includes poignant songs, oral histories, legends, tribal versions of Mahabharata and Ramayana also. The book conveys the routine exploitation of tribal citizens and take you through an emotional journey that highlights the plight of these people whose stories speak to the soul. Ochareti, the Arya Woman by Narayan, translated by Catherine Thankama. This is the first novel by Narayan, the first tribal novelist from South India. I have deliberately taken up certain works from South India because I was doing this conference for that particular area of the country. The story based on Malayarar tribe in Kerala, sorry for the mispronunciation, follows an Adivasi couple through the different phases of their lives and records a vivid account of their daily traditions, which allows the reader to learn about their experience and experience the tribe's cultural traditions. Black Lilies, Telugu Dalit Poetry in English translation, edited by K. Purushottam. Telugu Dalit poetry originates from South India, where cultural traditions are very different from the North. Telugu Dalit literature is serious in nature, and it is based on subjects such as untouchability, poverty, discrimination, so on. So again, the areas of concern are going to remain more or less the same. The treatment may be a little different, but the areas of concern are same. It encompasses the situations experienced by the Dalits as the victims of the imperious caste system in India. So their marginalization is on the basis of their caste. Further recommended readings: Black Words, White Pages by Aboriginal Literature by Adam Shoemaker, The Book of the Fourth World by Gordon Brotherstone, Exploring Fourth World Literature, Tribals, Adivasis, Dalits by Raja Shekhar, which I think you must have read also, Indigenous People and the Nation State by Noel Dick, and Indigenous Literature of Australia, Milli Milli Wonka by Mudruru Narugin. Mudruru Narugin is a very significant critic if you want to study or you want to really understand the Australian Aboriginal literature. That's all from my side, and I've given you the detailed description of these books because I really want to be of certain value, and one particular session can never do it. Like, you cannot justify and talk about all the aspects. So these books go a long way, and you can further consult them for any clarification. That's all from my side, and over to the organizers, and I'm open to any kind of question or anything, a doubt. You can deliberate upon that. Thank you.